Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Pilkey-Jarvis with the Washington Department of Ecology Spills Program. I manage the oil spill preparedness work for the agency. We develop and approve plans that help the Washington communities reduce or prevent damages, that'll occur when oil is spilled. So this presentation is about the Northwest Area Contingency Plan. If you watch this, it should prepare you for success should you have a spill in Washington, or should you be training ahead of an oil spill drill that you're going to have here. Okay, so the Northwest Area Contingency Plan, and on this slide you'll see a cover of the current current version of the plan. It's developed under both federal and state regulations. So there are regulatory reasons, both at the federal level and state levels, for putting this plan together. In the Pacific Northwest, you have 3 states, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, that have planned together for oil and hazardous material responses and are all signatories to this plan. We're in the jurisdiction of the Regional Response Team 10. So RRT 10 is a group of agencies that have authority to make spill-specific decisions at times and to aid in responses when the spills begin to exceed local capability. This plan is a regional contingency plan. It's EPA's inland area plan, and it is the Washington statewide master plan, as well as the state plans for Oregon and Idaho. In this area as well, we have 2 marine area plans, one for sector Puget Sound and one for sector Columbia River. So the single plan is actually multiple plans in a single volume. And most recently here, we've had the 2 area plans for the Coast Guard sectors develop their own plans that are separately published. But all of these plans should be consistent in their content. They may vary in terms of detail, but there should not be any issues with being able to follow them all as we all plan together and they have consistent content. So the Northwest Area Contingency Plan contains policies, tools, and guidance that you're going to need for responding. We have had this plan in place for decades. And for decades, we have successfully used it in just a variety of oil spills, from ships, pipelines, trains, and other types of facilities, and many other sources as well. It succeeds because of the community that we have in the Pacific Northwest and the commitment that we all share to have really solid response plans. We have a real community of experts in the Northwest, and we're very fortunate about that. And many of those experts thankfully give us their time year after year to help improve the Northwest Area Contingency Plan. So let's get into some of the content. There are policies for a responsible party in this plan. One of the things that we like to talk about here is how very, very difficult it is for all of us to talk about the potential spill volume. And what we want is to avoid having initially an understatement about what the spill volume might be, and then later to have to go back and start adding zeros to that. So we always talk about speaking to the maximum potential volume. That's one of the numbers that we should put out there, and hold off until we have more certainty before we start getting into a specific volume. So we want you to respond to the maximum extent possible. You don't always know all the facts early on, so that's really the safest place to be. Another policy for the responsible party is to immediately ramp up your response. So that's what we expect. We expect you to get resources rolling right away, and everybody's trained to that. You can always call things back as you learn more and you understand that you may not need them, but we all want to get out the door as quickly as possible. Both of those things speak to rapid aggressive response. And the third kind of a policy for a responsible party is for those of you who are leaders, the response leaders, we expect you to be trained and be experienced and ready to use strategic messaging about your response and your spill. So that's where we get the well-coordinated aspects of rapid, aggressive, and well-coordinated response. So I'm going to have a little bit more on that later when we have a slide that speaks to our 96-hour plan for major incidents. So let's move on. We have several unique staffing policies in the Pacific Northwest. So on this slide, you're looking at the triangle that sits on top of the incident command system organization that we use in the Northwest, and that box is for a unified command. So sometimes you might see that as a box, but we have a triangle because here in the Pacific Northwest, Unified Command might also include local on-scene coordinators, or tribal on-scene coordinators. You'll only have one local. You might, and that might be, let's say, a county emergency manager or a fire department. There may be more counties involved in a spill, but they'll have to figure out who will speak in Unified Command, and the others might be deputies. But you could have more than one tribal on-scene coordinator. And that's because tribes have their own sovereign government, and they're entitled to sit in Unified Command and make decisions for themselves. So that's our first unique staffing policy. The next two concern the information officer and the liaison officer. And we have a preference that staffing for those positions will come from an agency rather than the responsible party. So the reason that policy was established several years ago is because we think that this helps us build trust with the messages that we want to put out there, whether you're speaking to the public through the media, or whether you're speaking to our elected officials, the governor's office. We think that it builds trust to put an agency out there. There is a strong caveat, however. It does have to be the most qualified person. So we expect that there would be a conversation about who should staff those positions at the very start of when we form a unified command. Don't just give it away because it's an agency. That agency person does need to be the most qualified. The next unique staffing policy that we have concerns the environmental unit, and we put an awful lot of importance and emphasis on the role of the environmental unit in responding to an oil spill, of course. So this has been a policy for decades that it should be led by a trustee agency. There's a slightly different nuance to this one than to the information officer and the liaison officer, because it also speaks to the idea that industry might co-lead. You could decide that you're going to co-lead the unit, or industry might have a preference to be an assistant or a deputy to the unit leader. This is really usually a very large group of people, and it's not unusual at all to bring in others who may have very little experience in ICS, but we need the information that they have to help us do the job. So being the lead here in this unit is more about being an organized manager of people, and it's less about necessarily being the best scientist, for example. And then the last unique staffing policy that we have in the Pacific Northwest under the Northwest Area Contingency Plan is that we've created a position called Tribal Coordination Specialist that sits in liaison. So this is non-standard ICS. And that really the aim of this position is to help tribes navigate through the incident command system and help them understand, where they best would fit in to the structure, whether it is to be a tribal on-scene coordinator and unified command, or whether it's to be in the environmental unit and help us learn about the existence of cultural resources, or whether they sit in safety or in operations or logistics. The tribes can have roles in each and any of those positions. And this person helps tribes who may not have experience in the area plan, in oil spills or ICS. It helps them successfully participate in a spill response. Tribes have a sovereign right to govern, and I think I mentioned that before, but just a little bit about the history in Washington and why this is so important to us. So over the years, tribes made treaties with the United States government, including provisions for reserved rights. So some tribes have reservations, and it's obvious that they have the right as a sovereign government to govern in their reservation. But through those treaties, they also have reserved rights that are in places that are outside of their reservation areas. And so these are rights to fishing and hunting, their usual and accustomed areas from the past. So there's a very unique relationship that exists between tribes and especially the federal government. And many of these treaties have been interpreted for years through court rulings. And there's a lot of federal laws that apply to this relationship. There are legal obligations from the federal government to the tribes, including the protection of those reserved rights. And those things can be very complicated to understand where they exist. Not all tribes sign treaties, so there's a few tribes in Washington that have reservations that were designated by executive order. There's even tribes that have reservations outside of the state but have reserved rights within the state. So what this means to us is that we can't make any assumptions at all about where somebody might have concerns and might have rights. We need to bring in the right people to help us understand which tribes to involve, the Department of Interior, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and we need to do that really from the start. I said earlier that I was going to talk about the 96-hour part of our Northwest Area Contingency Plan. And this is something that we put into the plan several years ago. And it really is a pretty important thing for people to understand. And it's a really great thing for you to train to. So it basically takes what we call a major incident and goes through 96 hours of it. So one of the things that is part of this plan is a checklist for 96 hours. So it starts at hour 0 and it goes to hour 96. And at each increment, whether it's 30 minutes, 1 hour, 5 hours, 10 hours, 24 hours, etc., it gives you a tip that by this point in time, you really should have started thinking about this aspect of a response. It doesn't mean that you have to have done it by then, but it's time for you to start thinking about it. So early thinking about alternative technologies, for example. To go through that process, if you're going to go through a decision process, would take you a long time, but you actually have to start thinking about it pretty early. So the checklist it's presented in a couple of ways in the area plan. It goes through that hourly look, as I just talked about, and it also, you can also look at your own position, your ICS position, and just look at the things that are attributed to you, or the things that you should be doing. So I'm going to show an example of that in a minute. Another thing that it has is a notification matrix. So it looks at the kinds of notifications that we should have made at the very start of an incident, whether it's a responsible party or an agency. These are the earliest notifications that we need to make to get a response ramped up. But then it carries through into when you form a unified command and tells you how to keep expanding those notifications. So there's a really good matrix as part of this plan. And the last thing that it has is a section on strategic messaging, not the kind of thing that you should read when a spill has happened. So for the response leaders in our community, this is the kind of thing that you should be reading well ahead of time and have it be part of your training. It talks about the ways that you should talk to people to build credibility in your response and gain their trust, for example. And it sort of also talks about the flow of messaging. So early in an incident, these are the kinds of things that we would know and we would need to speak about. And then as it goes on, you should be prepared to expand those messages. So it's a pretty important tool. And if I could go to the next slide, I will show what I mean by, so this is off of the Northwest Area Contingency Plan website. And if you look to the left when you go to this website and click on the 96-hour tool, this is the one that pops up where it's segregated by the ICS position. So if you're logistics, you can go straight to logistics and see the kinds of things that are in that checklist for you. Or this one shows the incident command. And so you can either look at it through time or look at it by position. And we're always looking for feedback on that so that we can improve it, by the way. Okay, so let's go on to the next topic from the area plan. If you haven't guessed by now, you can see that for the Pacific Northwest, the communication positions are so critical. It goes hand in hand with operational success. We need to be able to be successful in communicating and being a credible source of information, a source of timely information, and have people believe us. That's as important as it is to operationally bring out all the equipment and have a good successful outcome to a response. So there are a bunch of policies and tools in the Northwest Area Contingency Plan. You can expect that for agencies, we are committed to having an initial release about a spill, so news release about a spill between 30 minutes of notification and 2 hours. These days, that's likely to be a tweet rather than a news release or something like that. But early on, the agencies will just put out the bare basics. We've had a report of this, and we, the ecology and the Coast Guard, are responding together. If you're the responsible party, you also may, during that period of time, release a message on your own, of your own. But once we form a JIC, then those messages will be coordinated. But these days, the race to be the credible and the timely source has already begun, because news of spills travels at the speed of light, especially in Washington State. One tool that the area plan has is it suggests an organizational structure for both JIC and liaison. And this structure has been pretty successful for us. It's standard ICS for the most part, with the exception of things like the tribal coordination specialist. We expect to have proactive messaging, and that includes through social media. There's some suggestions for social media policies, for website policies, and that sort of thing. We do have some overlap between the JIC and liaison in our plan here when it comes to community relations. Both JIC and liaison, could be the group that reaches out to communities directly either through a thing like a press release or through a town hall meeting. So what we want is for JIC and liaison to get together pretty quickly and talk about that, so that there isn't cross purposes. Figuring out how you're going to manage your resources that way is sort of the first example of coordination, I think, between JIC and liaison. We have JIC manuals and liaison manuals, full of really good information, a lot of local information, templates, and that kind of a thing. And we expect that both those groups are going to write a plan that lays out how they're going to address the specific concerns and issues that they are going to be hearing about during the day. And the last thing, which I've already talked about, but that's that tribal coordination specialist in liaison. I'm going to move on to one more command staff position, which is safety. And safety, of course, is the first and foremost concern on a response. But there are some things that you should know about health and safety planning in the Pacific Northwest. Both Oregon and Washington, those are two of the three states that sign on to the Northwest Area Contingency Plan, have state safety programs. So we have the equivalent of OSHA. And so whatever plan you're going to write, it needs to comply with, in Oregon and Washington, it needs to comply with both federal and state requirements. So there are some tools in the NWACP that will help you know what those requirements are pre-reading. It is best, a safety plan should cover all response tactics. So it's not something that should be produced in an instant. You need to at least go through part of the planning process and be out there listening for the tactics that people might be proposing in order for you to write that plan. And last of all, we ask that you actively plan for how you will communicate on safety to everybody in the response. And that includes those that are in the field. So that's an important part of the Northwest Area Contingency Plan. So I'm going to go through a bunch of things that are specific to operations and planning, but also important to things like like finance and logistics. So if we're, operationally planning on something, then we have to know how to procure the resources to perform that tactic, and we have to, calculate the costs, the finances of these things. So these are all related. There's pretty extensive guidance in the Northwest Area Contingency Plan about how to build your organization in operations, which is really the heart of what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to respond and remove the oil. So there's org charts for small, medium, and large size incidents. Why does that matter? It matters quite a lot. There's an art to this, and it really takes an experienced person to understand all the terminology, task forces, groups, branches. How do you build that up in a way that you're going to have good safety measures and good span of control? So lots of guidance in the plan about that. Part of organizing yourself in the field is understanding where you'll be working on land and how to establish divisions in those areas. So there's a naming convention. Reason that we ended up doing this in the Northwest Area Contingency Plan is because we have a lot of water areas that are complicated. We have, a water body that two states might share, and we have a lot of islands in the water bodies. So to save ourselves time, we agreed on a naming convention that takes all of that into account. And it's based maybe on county governments too. So it tells you how to write name a division on an island area or on a river, and then between two states. So this is something that ops should do with the environmental unit early on in a response. So we have, just like any regional plan in the country, we have policy on the use of dispersants, and we have pre-identified areas where dispersants use is pre-approved, conditionally approved, or not approved. So that's standard for the United States. We do have a map that shows all those areas. It's accessible through things like NOAA's IRMA program. So the red that you can see sort of in a faded way on this slide would be the not approved areas. The blue is pre-approved, and that is areas only off the coast of Washington and Oregon. And then the gold is where it's conditionally approved. So depending on where your spill occurs, your process for considering it will be different. Off the coast at the tip of Washington state, that large area of gold, the reason that is not pre-approved is because we have a national marine sanctuary there, and then we have a really large area for the Macaw tribe of their usual and accustomed. So those areas do not fall into the pre-approval, but they are in the conditional approval. The plan contains the process. There are 5 tools that you would run through in trying to form a decision process on the use of dispersants, depending on what area that you sit in. But this requires action from ops, safety, planning, JIC, and liaison. It really does require work from everybody if you're going to consider it. So one of the things that we want to do here under our area plan in the Pacific Northwest is we aren't going to wait until a decision is made before we start communicating about it. While that decision process is going through, while all these groups are working through those tools to get to a recommendation and get to a decision, we will be informing people that is happening. It would not build a lot of trust and credibility to just suddenly announce that a decision is made when you've had hours of working on it. In some of these places, the RRT needs to be convened, so that after the Unified Command makes a decision, they need to convene the RRT to get their concurrence. And the RRT has committed to being able to give that concurrence or not, make that decision within 2 hours. So we've done our best to make it very specific and have all the tools in place to make that consideration as quickly as we can. Next slide. This concerns in situ burning, and it's fairly similar in terms of how to make the decision, and the need to communicate about it. There are a few nuances in the policies. So we have the EPA and the Coast Guard planning together under this Northwest Area Contingency Plan. So there's a few nuances between their policies, but basically burning is pre-authorized in areas that are greater than 3 miles away from human population centers. And that's defined as 100 people per square mile. And it's case by case in other areas. Same thing, we need everybody working on it and everybody communicating about it. And it may require the RRT to be convened. So this is kind of the last in that area of what some might call alternative technologies, but we have a process and a policy around the use of surface washing agents. So these would be chemicals that help us remove oil from a surface, a substrate, or a surface when conventional methods won't work. For example, if you have a very heavily weathered oil, there could be a lot of good reasons for doing this and a lot of reasons to not do it, just like any other kind of a tactic. But there has to be an approved product, and you got to work through the process and get approval to do it, much like in situ burning and use of dispersants. So because the Northwest Area Contingency Plan expresses a preference or a priority for use of mechanical recovery, we want to maximize mechanical recovery as much as we can, get as much as we can off the water, avoid shoreline impacts, and hopefully avoid having to make some of those other harder decisions. Our area plan talks about waste management, and there's several things that it speaks to. Whenever you're planning a tactic, you should be thinking about the waste stream that it might generate, and avoid waste as much as possible. But basically, you need to be able to write a disposal plan that shows how you're going to get oil or oily debris or oily water or oiled, sorbents or disposable things off the water onto some interim storage facility all the way to its final disposal. So right from the very start, you need to be planning for how you're going to manage the waste from start to finish in a response. And there's lots of tools to help you do that in our area plan. Seems like this is a topic that goes hand in hand with waste management. But we have a plan and an approval memo for the use of decanting. And in the classic sense, what that means, because we want to maximize on-water recovery and mechanical recovery as much as we can, we want our skimmers and our temporary storage to stay out on the water as long as possible. So in some cases, you can lengthen that amount of time by decanting the hopefully mostly the water. Oil and water have separated in your storage, and you're going to dump a little bit of that water off to make some more room in your storage device to keep on trying to recover it. That's kind of a classic thing, a way of what decanting means in a response. It does mean other things too, but basically you're getting approval for an incidental discharge because you can't guarantee that what you're pumping off would be purely water and not also have a little bit of oil in it. So the policy in the Northwest is that if it's a heavier oil, you have pre-approval in the first 24 hours. That's when you might have the most shortages of storage and other equipment. That's what the thinking is. If it's a lighter oil, you do not have pre-approval for 24 hours, and you must first, go through this process and ask. And if it is a heavier oil and you have done it for the first 24 hours, after that period of time, you need to ask and get, it's both the FOSC and the SOSC to give their approval for this. In the last couple of years, we've had a really big improvement to the Northwest Area Contingency Plan on understanding both our resources and our capabilities and the tools around performing community air monitoring. So this is something that we practice quite a lot in drills and in real responses. This happens a lot too. So we need to be able to go into the communities when a spill has occurred and make sure that people are safe. And so we have a very lengthy part of our plan that speaks to this. And there is a template for a plan, and basically, you get your resources, and they may take a little bit of time to cascade in, but you want to set up monitoring stations somewhere in the community that has been impacted by a spill. And in order to do that, you got to know something about the community. So where are the best places to set that up? Near schools, near nursing homes, and that kind of thing. But just like the use of dispersants and in situ burning, everybody has to be part of this process for community air monitoring. The JIC and liaison have to be in the loop to be able to communicate out. Unified Command is certainly going to want to know how often they're going to hear the results, and they're probably going to give you a requirement that if there's any exceedance of monitoring level, that they need to be notified right away. So this is an excerpt from the plan, and it's kind of a complicated, maybe a larger spill incident, but it shows how the communication should all occur. And in our plan, we have this being run out of the environmental unit. And that is because the response leaders think that it's so important. They want to make sure that the communication is going to occur, especially for any exceedance. And so they have placed that responsibility in the environmental unit. Non-floating oils. This is a kind of an emerging topic right now, although we've done work in the last couple of years about non-floating oils. So we have tools and we have templates. We have a requirement that as soon as you have assessed that there is a potential for oil to not remain floating, you have a requirement to notify Unified Command about that right away and begin planning for it. So there's different phases of a non-floating oil response. We're very, very, very rarely talking about oil that immediately submerges or sinks. That would be the heaviest of oil types like asphalt. So really the reality is when it remains in the environment for so long and, the properties change, it gets weathered, when it gets close to shore and encounters sediment, those are the times that we would expect and have to look for oils that might not remain floating. And then most recently, here and really, I think around the nation, people are looking at the new requirements for low sulfur fuel oils and starting to understand that those might have properties of non-floating oils. And so as there's all these requirements for ships to move to that type of fuel oil, it has become a bigger consideration. These fuels have, these oils have low evaporative loss, they're persistent. The response to these can be a bit challenging. So this is definitely an emerging area, I think. But we're pretty well posed in our Northwest Area Contingency Plan because we have a lot of information in here already about non-floating oils. Our plan, because of the nature location of tribes in the Pacific Northwest, that we have a lot of different tools in our plan. So we look at what your responsibilities are when you encounter cultural resources or how to avoid impacts to cultural resources. We would like to have the tribes participate in the environmental unit so that they can, protect their own resources that way. But we might do things like write an inadvertent discovery plan that we would give to people in the field that tells them what to do if they inadvertently discover cultural resources, for example, and then we have tools and templates, and we describe the process for consultation that needs to occur. Shoreline assessment cleanup technique. Several years ago, the EPA had some money, and they funded the development of a SCAT plan that is contained within our Northwest Area Contingency Plan. And it's a really fantastic tool that's full of best practices as well as templates. It's something that you can train people on because it goes through all phases of what SCAT might look like. One interesting thing here in our Northwest Area Contingency Plan is that it's the Coast Guard's policy that SCAT is managed out of the environmental unit, but it's the EPA's policy that it possibly could be managed out of operations. So there are differences in where people choose to do this work, but I think most classically it's done out of the environmental unit. Another sort of twist to how this might be done in other areas in the Pacific Northwest, we have wildlife being managed completely out of operations. So it's kind of the opposite of SCAT, but because we have such a huge and very involved wildlife community, it is all done in the wildlife branch, both the planning and the implementation of it. And so that's where we need to bring together the equipment, the infrastructure, the people, and the permits to go through all the different phases of managing oil wildlife. And it needs to be led by somebody from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, or in Washington State, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has delegated that to the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. So they have to manage the whole thing. This is just a slide to remind us that there are a lot of very precious resources in the Northwest. And if something were to happen during, a bad time of the year to impact some of these things like salmon and southern resident killer whales, there will be a lot of people involved in that. And the plan also describes a possible tactic of deterrence that we would use for some, different kinds of wildlife, but most classically, I think, with the southern resident killer whale. And so there is some pre-authorization to the local FOSC, Federal On-Scene Coordinator, to be able to manage deterrence activities if it involves southern resident killer whale. All right, that's my tour of the operations part, but there's so much more and just not enough time to touch on everything. I have just a couple more things to cover, but I did want to mention that we also have information about fast water response, gasoline response, responses to Bakken oil spills, salvage, places of refuge, flight restrictions, command posts, staging areas, remote sensing. There's just so much more in this Northwest Area Contingency Plan that speaks to successful spill response. My last topic today is going to be about geographic response plans. In the very first slide, I mentioned that our Northwest Area Contingency Plan at this point is a regional plan. It's the EPA's Inland Area Plan. It's the plan for all the states. And it's the plan separately published now for the two Coast Guard sectors. These geographic response plans, they're an annex to and all levels of planning. So they belong in the area plans that are separately published, as well as this large Northwest Area Contingency Plan. We've had them for decades. I think most areas of the country have them as well. They speak to land-based strategies, mostly booming strategies. And so we go into a geographic area. We pre-identify the resources that are at risk of being damaged from an oil spill, and where we can, we develop pre-approved strategies so we can respond without delays. They are practiced a lot. They're done in drills, they're done in training. We have developed these strategies for floating oils. They're not strategies for non-floating oils. And we develop them for average conditions, average currents, and that kind of thing. They may have to be modified, therefore, on the day of a spill. The most important part probably are the two pagers. That's what we call them. And so that's where your strategy will be written out. They are prioritized. So if you're, on the day of a spill, you'll be told exactly which ones to do in what order. They have a lot more information about habitat and species that is useful to the environmental unit. They are just the beginning. So we can get out quickly, get to work quickly. But once Unified Command is formed, we will look for and develop other strategies beyond these. So we purposefully don't put GRP strategies everywhere, because these are just the most important priorities so that we can avoid delays. The way that they work is that we look for potential spill locations. So that maybe this might be where a railroad bridge crosses a river, or it's the location of a facility, or that kind of thing. It's along the vessel traffic routes. So we'll say, okay, this is a place where we could potentially have a spill. So there's a spill origin point that is identified. And then from there, we will say, if you spill here or you spill somewhere close to here, here's the order of priority that we want you to implement all or deploy all this boom and start protecting the resources at risk. So that's how the prioritization comes in. And then the next slide will give you an example of what the strategies look like. So we try to put information that everybody will need: aerial photographs, street directions, how much boom it's going to take, what angle you should put the boom, the things that you need to consider to do this safely. Here's a place if you are deploying by water, here's a staging area that you can get access to this location, and that kind of thing. So they're developed for most places in Washington, we're always developing more and updating them. And these really are kind of the heart of our planning and an effective way to have rapid, aggressive, and well coordinated response. So that's it. Just thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this. And, we're always looking for ideas to improve our plan. If you have ideas for us, please just let us know. We have an annual process for updating it. And we have so much community involvement. And we're really so very lucky to be able to keep and maintain such a great plan. Thank you.